President and CEO of Hecla Mining. I was reading your bio, Phil. I guess you've been there for 22 years.
I have. 20 years as CEO.
Oh, congrats. So I'm sure you know the company well. There's nothing here that's going to test your knowledge too hard on Hecla. But let's kick it off. As we all know, Hecla is the largest silver producer in the U.S. You're expecting to grow to 20 million ounces a year by 2025. Can you remind us, what's your path to that growth? And how does kind of broad M&A fit into that growth strategy? And maybe also touch on your jurisdictional focus as well.
Sure. In 2018, we produced 10 million ounces of silver. So this 2025, 20 million will be a doubling of where we were just a few years ago. What has really driven that is really innovation at the mines. Number one, at Greens Creek. Greens Creek's just such an incredible mine, and there's just constant innovation that's occurred, whether it's using technology in the drilling, the jumbos, or increasing the throughput, or improving the recoveries within the mine. That has been a constant state of improvement, and my hat's off to the guys that run that operation. At the Lucky Friday, we've created a new mining method, the underhand closed bench method. This will be the second time that Hecla has devised a new method. We devised one in 1987, and then this UCB method. That allows that mine to go to sort of 5 million plus ounces of production. And then of course, we did an acquisition, Kino Hill, and we would expect that mine to go maybe as 2.5 million ounces this year, and order of magnitude something in the 4 million ounce range in the future. So those have been the drivers. Where we go from here is continued innovation at each of those operations, and then I'm sure there'll be things that we'll bring into the portfolio. That's what we've done in the past. I would expect us to do that in the future.
Great, thanks, Phil. That's very good overview. Let's dive deeper into some of these assets here. Earlier today, you put out a press release on Lucky Friday. Can you maybe talk to us in terms of the fire event at the asset? As you mentioned, there might be some impact on 2023. Fortunately, it sounds like there won't be much impact in terms of production in 2024. Again, can you maybe touch on what happened and what has been done so far?
Well, the Lucky Friday is really an incredible mine. I've received some messages from people who say, "Oh, you need to change the name of it. It's not lucky to have the name Lucky in the mine." But remember, this is a mine that's been operating for 82 years. So any mine that can operate that long is a very lucky mine. So what happened? If you'll go to the slide that shows the image of the mine, yeah. So realize that the Lucky Friday has had a lot of infrastructure built over the years, and in the 50s, the 2 shaft was built, and that was the primary access into the mine. But since that time, the silver shaft was built, and then more recently, the 4 shaft. And so what we're talking about is the 2 shaft, this secondary escapeway, this ventilation shaft. And within that shaft, it's because it was built in the 50s, we are in a constant state of maintaining it and repairing it. And in that process, we fill these voids that happen. And somehow or another, we don't know yet what caused it. A fire occurred. And as a result of that, what we're doing is building a new access to the shaft higher up, so that we don't have to rely upon that lower part of that shaft. Again, it's not used for production. It's not used for anything but ventilation and secondary escapeway. We think with the insurance that we have, The financial impact will be minimal in this year, and we would anticipate all the repairs will be done before the end of the year and will be in normal production next year.
Great. And, Phil, you touched on the insurance policy. I don't know how much you can share with us, but I think there's a deductible. Is that significant? And then on top of that, some of the work that you're doing to restart Lucky Friday, what's the cost? What's the CapEx?
The CapEx is order of magnitude less than $10 million. In terms of the deductible, it's a business interruption, so it's 30 days, and then so the remaining months we will be reimbursed for our costs and profit that we would anticipate.
Great. Maybe let's switch gears a little bit, Phil. Let's go to the Yukon now. Can you talk about maybe the continued ramp up at the asset Kino Hill? I believe, as you mentioned in the last quarterly statements, throughput in June was about 330 tons per day. The mill is expected to ramp up to 440 tons per day by year end. What are some of the key areas that we should be watching?
Yeah, so we were at 330 tons, and at the very end of the second quarter, we've maintained that sort of level, roughly speaking. Realize that one of the things that we're doing is upgrading the crushing system, and so we had it completely taken apart, and we have been using a secondary crusher, and that permanent crusher will be put in place certainly by the end of October. And that will allow us, as we ramp that new crushing system up, that will allow us to get to that 440 tons per day. Things to look for are, as we develop the Birmingham, is the number of headings that we have, so that we have the flexibility to operate the mine. We currently have 6 headings. We would expect to have 8 shortly, and hopefully by the end of the year, early next year, we'll have 12 headings. And that just gives us the flexibility to be able to maintain that throughput. The sort of grade that we're seeing is what we would expect, sort of 20 to 30 ounces per ton, roughly 25 ounces, and should allow us to get to this call it 2.5 million ounces for the year and be at this sort of 4 million ounce level next year.
Thanks, Phil. And I'm glad that you touched on grade. As you said, very high grade. I believe in Q2 it was 29 ounce per ton, ounces, not grams. But you also had to use some of the stockpile material to put through the mill. So that, decreased the head grade a little. I think you kind of mentioned it as well, it might be due to headings and whatnot. But could you maybe talk about the grade revolution or evolution that we should be expecting at the mill as we look ahead?
Yeah, so during the quarter, we would expect to see somewhat high, in the fourth quarter, somewhat higher grade, with combined with the throughput allows us to get the ounce production. And then in the coming years, what you'll see is higher grade in the early years and then somewhat lower grade, but at that point we'll have more headings, we'll have more ability to have a consistent throughput through the mill. So I think the economics, like Greens Creek, right? You think about Greens Creek, it started that mine at the same grade that Kino is, 25, 26 ounce per ton. Today we're at 14 ounces per ton. So the same thing will happen over time at Kino, and it will be a continual improvement, continual increase in throughput.
Thanks, Phil. Maybe sticking, in the Yukon here, you had acquired Alexco to gain access to Kino Hill. More recently, you acquired ATAC to increase your land holdings in the area. And this kind of goes back to my first question, Phil. You've always talked about sort of district scale for your assets. And there are, clearly more companies in the Yukon here and more assets in the Yukon. Should we expect continued M&A from Hecla in Yukon and maybe elsewhere as well as you build up this district scale in certain geographical areas?
Yeah, I guess I would suggest, Cosmo, that as we think about M&A, our starting point is with silver. You know, we have been a silver producer for 130 years. The reason we had been focused on Kino since 2008 was because of its silver endowment. So that's number one, is we're going to look for silver, and we're going to look for silver almost anywhere in the world. But when you have an operation and you have the infrastructure, whether that's equipment and locations, or it's just people and the knowledge of the jurisdiction, then we're prepared to look at other things than silver. So yeah, I would expect just like we did the Attack transaction, and that transaction was primarily gold, although there is the portion of it that is more silver dominant. I would expect to see us do more M&A. We're a unique company in that we produce half of all the silver that's mined in the United States. We should, by 2025 or so, produce about 40% of all the silver that's mined in Canada. And so as a result of that, we should be able to add new assets to us, some which could be in those jurisdictions, but we'll also consider other jurisdictions as well.
Great. And as you talk about silver focus, could you maybe touch on the exploration potential here at Kino Hill and ATAC, and what are some of your near-term plans and also longer-term plans in terms of organic growth?
So Kino, since we've acquired it, we've increased the reserve base about a third. And I would expect over time, given the exploration results that we're having, to see that continue to increase. This coming year, we're going to actually drill during the winter. That's something that Kino has not done. You look at some of our competitors in the area; they all are drilling in the winter, so there's not a technical issue with doing it. But we just need more data so that we can advance our exploration programs there quicker.
Great. Let's move on to Alaska. Phil, you had touched on Greens Creek earlier. What I have to say is Greens Creek has been a very steady and profitable producer for Hecla 2023, 2022, 2021. I believe there's a mine tour heading there sometime next month in October. What are you hoping to show investors?
I think it really is that innovation that we have at Greens Creek, and it's really the model for the rest of the company. Hecla has been the operator of the mine since 2008. We've owned a portion of it since 1987. And it's since 2008 that you have seen dramatic changes in the tonnage that we produce. I know we were roughly 2,000 tons per day when we acquired it. We're now at 2,600 tons a day. So you just have this incremental improvements. And what we really want investors to not forget is Greens Creek, and how valuable Greens Creek is, how it really is the underlying driver of the company. And yes, the Lucky Friday has changed dramatically. Kino's coming on, but don't forget the importance of Greens Creek is providing that sort of base of production, base of cash flow. It's $100+ million free cash flow generator. Since 2006, it's generated $1.8 billion of free cash flow. It's a remarkable asset, and we don't want people to forget that.
Great. And maybe we'll touch on Casa Berardi as well. At Casa Berardi, you've started to transition from underground to primarily an open pit operation, with the F-160 pit acting as transition from the underground operation to higher grade open pits later on. The higher grade pits are currently in the permitting pipeline. So I guess my question is two parts. First, how's the transition going, the current transition? And two, can you remind us of the future growth prospects of CASA?
So the transition's going well. We have shut down one portion of the underground so that we can use the pit above it as a place to put waste in that pit. It's a clay material, and so you can't mine underneath it. It also will lower our unit costs because you don't have this, spread of people out over the larger area. And then we're in the final phases of development that we're doing in the West Mine, and so that will be completed development and completed mining in 2024. And this is what has always been the plan, is to go from underground to open pits. When we acquired CASA in 2013, the real value driver happens with the operation of these open pits, and that hasn't changed. Over the next 5 years, we would expect to be cash flow positive at CASA. When we get out 5 years from now, we will then start to spend on the stripping of the 2 higher grade pits, and to put that in the context, it's like 70% higher grade than what we're mining in the 160 pit. So the economics are good in the 160 pit. They're substantially better in those two open pits. So the future for CASA looks good. We will have a period of time for investment, but then it's a big free cash flow generator, and we'll continue to explore there. There's 37 kilometers of land that we control on the Casa Berardi break, and it's virtually unexplored. Interestingly enough, the fires in Quebec, one of the things they've done is they've actually made surface work, mapping and geochem more accessible than it was before.
Great. I don't see any questions on my iPad. I just want to make sure that I don't miss any questions again. Yep, there's one here. Go for it.
Phil, in the Yukon, how are you navigating a new jurisdiction, some new political environment to be working with in Canada, First Nations relations? I noticed the Minister of Finance is in the audience. What's your approach for the new jurisdiction with Kino Hill?
Well, the first thing we try to do is be a good citizen in the Yukon, and I think we're doing that. We're constantly trying to figure out how to improve that operation. We walked in to the acquisition of Alexco, and they did some things really well. They did some things that needed improving, and so that's really has been the focus, making sure that our environmental standards are Hecla standards, making sure our safety standards are Hecla standards. So that's been the number one thing, and then engaging with all the different parties. It is a complex place to operate in, but the resources are so substantial. The ability to really make a big impact on the Yukon is so great that we're very focused on advancing there, and we feel very welcomed there. There has been absolutely a positive view of mining in the Yukon, and I think it's going to have a great future. Clearly, things need to, you can always improve things, but it is really a very good place to operate.
Thank you, Phil. I think that's all the questions or time for questions we have today, but I'm sure Phil's going to be happy to answer any questions on the side as well.
Do we have 1 minute where I can just...
Of course, Phil.
So I'd just like to say something about silver, because this is the Denver Gold Group, and so people don't hear too much about silver. Just realize the fundamental change that's happening in silver as a key element of creating photovoltaic cells. It takes about 500,000 ounces of silver for 1 gigawatt of solar energy, and it's growing at a remarkable rate. In the U.S. this past year, the first half of this year was 30% more imports of photovoltaic cells than the first half of last year. We think that you'll have 170 million ounces this year, maybe 200 million ounces next year of silver used for photovoltaic. It's a whole new world for silver.
Thank you, Phil.